This presentation is called Forming Hypotheses. The hypothesis is a tentative explanation for an observation or scientific problem. In order to use a hypothesis, you must be able to test it by further investigation. This investigation is also known as your experiment. There are some steps that you go through when you write a hypothesis before you start your experiment. First step is to start by identifying the investigative question. It has to be something you can actually test, not something that you would simply observe or have an opinion about. Second step is to identify the independent and dependent variables in that experiment. We've gone over this when you did your SpongeBob variables assignment. You should be able to ask yourself, how will the independent variable affect the dependent variable? So think like cause and effect. When you design your experiment, you assume that the independent variable is the cause and the dependent variable is the effect, such as if I give a certain amount of water to a plant, how will that affect its growth? And the third step is to use the if, then, because form when you write your hypothesis. These have significant meanings, these three parts to the hypothesis. The if is where you write about your independent variable. After the word then is where you write about your dependent variable. And after the word because is where you state your scientific reason for your thoughts. So your hypothesis should sound like this. If the independent variable, and here at this point you would choose either increase or decrease or another appropriate word, then the dependent variable will, and again you choose either increase or decrease, because. When you write your hypothesis, you would change the colored words based on whatever your investigative question is. Let's try some examples. Make sure you take a look at your assignment questions when we're going through these examples. The investigative question in example 1 says, what happens to the speed at which a marble travels when the height of a ramp is changed? Make sure you fill in these answers for your assignment. Think about what is the cause, what is the effect, and what might a hypothesis be? If you said that the height of the ramp is the independent variable, you're correct. That's what the scientist can change in this experiment. He or she can make the ramp higher or lower. What does this height of the ramp affect? Well, it might affect the speed of the marble. So as the investigator changes the height of the ramp, they would then also measure the speed as the marble goes down it. So a hypothesis in the correct format might say this. If the height of the ramp increases, then the speed of the marble will increase because the marble will be closer to a free fall situation. Notice the because in this statement. After the word because, you need to have some sort of scientific reason. Try to avoid your opinion in this part of the sentence. You don't want to say the marble will go faster or the speed of the marble will increase because I like it better. Let's look at another example. If the question says, which dishwashing detergent removes grease faster, your independent variable, or the thing the scientist controls, would be the brand of dishwashing detergent. The dependent variable would be the speed of grease removal. How fast does the grease go away? Notice that your dependent variable is something that you can measure. And finally, if we put these things together, we have a hypothesis that might sound like this. If you use brand X dishwashing detergent, then the grease will come off the dish in less time because brand X has more effective grease removing chemicals. Notice here I didn't use the word increase or decrease in this hypothesis because it didn't really fit the situation. I could have said the grease will come off the dish faster, but it's a little more precise to say less time. Example number 3. The question says, what will happen if salt is added to ice? The independent variable is the amount of salt that you add. So you can kind of get a picture in your head of a student setting up an experiment. They have the same amount of ice in, let's say, 3 different containers, and they add a different amount of salt to each container. The dependent variable is the amount of time it takes for ice to melt. So as they add a different amount of salt to each container, the student could measure how long it takes for the ice to melt completely. As a hypothesis, that student might say, if the amount of salt increases or decreases, then the time it takes the ice to melt will increase or decrease because. Here's where I would like you to start making your own choices. As you write your answer in your assignment, at the beginning of the sentence we've determined that the independent variable goes with if. Remember, I, independent if. If the amount of the salt, and then I want you to choose increase or decrease. How do you think that will affect the time it takes the ice to melt? And most importantly, why do you think that is true? Example number 4 is another choose your own response. The investigative question is, what conditions affect the growth of seeds? One possible independent variable for this might be the amount of fertilizer that's given to the plant. As a dependent variable, an investigator could measure the height of the plant. So a possible hypothesis might sound like, if the amount of fertilizer increases or decreases, then the height of the plant will increase or decrease because. And again, in this example, choose what you think is the most appropriate term in each of these parentheses and give me a scientific reason why. Your last 2 examples require a little more work from you. Your investigative question in example number 5 is what affects the number of popped kernels in a bag of microwave popcorn. You determine what you think the independent variable could be. What could you change if you were doing an experiment to find this out? What would you be testing the effect of? Your dependent variable needs to be something that you measure as a result. Hopefully your dependent variable is more obvious than your independent variable. And I would like you to write a hypothesis to support this experiment. Remember, after the word if, write down your independent variable, then choose something appropriate like increase or decrease. After the word then, write down your dependent variable and choose an appropriate increase or decrease type word. And finally, finish your hypothesis with your scientific reason why. The final example, again all on your own, the question says, what affects the flight of a paper airplane? Determine your independent variable. If you were testing the flight of a paper airplane, what do you think might cause it to fly further or less far? Your dependent variable, what would you measure as a result of the independent variable that you changed? And then put your hypothesis into an if then because statement. As always, if you have any questions, please email me and I would be happy to help you.